When the Navy SEAL recruits laughed at the woman joining their pre-dawn training drill, they had no idea they were being tested, and they had no idea they were failing catastrophically. The sky over Naval Amphibious Base Coronado was still dark at 04:45 hours. The sun wouldn't rise for another 30 minutes. The training for basic underwater demolition SEAL candidates started long before dawn. That was the point. Break them down before most people even woke up. 40 recruits stood in formation on the beach, their breath visible in the cold Pacific air. They wore standard PT gear, already soaked with sweat and seawater from the previous evolution. They were in week 8 of Bud-S training, past the infamous Hell Week, but still months away from earning their tridents. The instructors had called a brief pause before the next drill. The recruits stood at ease, muscles aching, minds numb with exhaustion. That's when she arrived. A woman in standard Navy PT uniform walked across the beach toward the formation. She was maybe 5'7", medium build, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her face was calm, unremarkable. She looked like she could be anyone: a visiting officer, a medical evaluator, a random person who had wandered onto the base by mistake. She carried no gear, no identification visible, nothing that indicated rank or purpose. She walked directly to the formation and took a position at the end of the back row, standing at ease like any other recruit. The recruits closest to her noticed first. A man named Jackson, a former college football player with the build to match, nudged his companion. "Is that a woman?" he whispered. His friend Rodriguez looked over and smirked. "What the hell? This isn't co-ed dodgeball. This is SEAL training." Several others turned to look. Quiet laughter rippled through the formation. Another recruit, a tall man named Peterson, who had been vocal about his views on women in combat roles, spoke louder than he probably intended. "This is a joke, right? They're not seriously letting her join the drill." The woman didn't react, didn't look at them, just stood at ease, breathing calmly, eyes forward. An instructor, Petty Officer First Class Martinez, called out, "Formation! Attention!" 40 recruits snapped to position. The woman moved with them, her posture correct, her bearing professional. Martinez began outlining the next evolution: a 6-mile beach run followed by log PT, then a 2-mile ocean swim. Standard punishment for whatever imaginary infraction the instructors had decided the class had committed. As Martinez spoke, Jackson whispered to Rodriguez, $5 says she quits before the first mile." "I'll take that bet," Rodriguez whispered back. "But I say she doesn't even make it to the first half mile." More quiet laughter. The woman remained expressionless, giving no indication she heard any of it. Martinez finished his briefing. "Move out. 6 miles, standard pace. If anyone falls behind, the entire class repeats the run. Let's go." The formation broke and began running north along the beach. The pace was punishing, designed to push already exhausted bodies past their breaking points. The woman fell into position near the back of the group. Several recruits immediately noticed and made a point of accelerating. Peterson called back to his friends, "Let's pick up the pace. Don't want anyone slowing us down." Jackson and Rodriguez grinned and increased their speed. Several others joined them, creating a faster pack at the front. The woman didn't react. She maintained a steady pace, controlled breathing, efficient stride, not trying to keep up with the accelerating leaders, but not falling behind either. By the 2-mile mark, the formation had stretched out. The fastest runners were 100 meters ahead. The middle pack was spread across another 100 meters. And bringing up the rear were the struggling recruits who were close to their physical limits. The woman ran alone, between the middle pack and the stragglers. Not struggling, not pushing hard, just maintaining a consistent rhythm. Jackson looked back and saw her still there. "She's still going," he said with surprise. "Give her time," Peterson said. "Women always hit a wall, just a matter of when." At the 3-mile mark, some of the men who had accelerated to leave her behind were starting to pay the price. Their sprint had burned energy they didn't have to spare. Several were falling back, their breathing ragged. The woman passed them without acknowledgement, her pace unchanged. By mile 4, she had moved up to the middle of the pack. Her breathing was controlled. Her stride remained efficient. She showed no signs of fatigue. The recruits around her were starting to notice. This wasn't what they expected. Rodriguez, who had bet she wouldn't last a half-mile, found himself running beside her. He tried to increase his pace to pull away, but his legs were burning. He couldn't sustain it. She pulled ahead of him effortlessly. At mile 5, she was running in the front third of the formation. Several of the men who had mocked her earlier were now behind her, struggling. Jackson pushed harder, determined not to be passed by a woman. His pride demanded it. He accelerated, pulling even with her. She glanced at him once, her expression neutral, then maintained her pace. Jackson tried to pull ahead. His muscles screamed in protest. He was running on fumes, his earlier acceleration having depleted his reserves. The woman stayed with him easily, her breathing still controlled. By mile 6, when the formation completed the run and collapsed on the beach, she was in the top 10. She wasn't winded, wasn't gasping for air like most of the men around her. She simply stood at ease, waiting for the next instruction. Peterson, bent over with his hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath, looked at her with confusion and something that might have been grudging respect. Martinez called out, 2 minutes rest, then log PT. Move to the logs. The recruits groaned and shuffled toward the massive telephone pole-sized logs that were used for team strength exercises. The woman moved with them, her demeanor unchanged. As they reached the logs, Jackson spoke quietly to Rodriguez. "Okay, she can run. But logs are different. That's pure strength. She'll get exposed here." Rodriguez nodded, wanting to believe it. The recruits divided into boat crews, 6 men per log. The woman joined a crew with 5 men, including Peterson and Jackson. Peterson made a show of sighing loudly. "Great. Now we're down a man because we have dead weight." Martinez barked out commands. "Logs up. Over your heads." 6 boat crews hoisted their logs overhead. The weight was distributed unevenly among the crew members based on height and strength. The woman took her position and lifted her share. Her arms didn't shake. Her legs didn't buckle. Peterson tried to subtly shift more weight to the other side, away from her, assuming she couldn't handle it. She adjusted her grip and maintained her portion of the load. For the next 30 minutes, Martinez ran them through brutal log exercises. Overhead presses, squats, running with the logs, holding the logs at arm's length. The woman performed every exercise without complaint. She wasn't the strongest in the crew, that was obvious. But she carried her weight. She didn't quit. She didn't ask for help. By the end of the log PT, several of the men were at their limits. 2 had to step out briefly to vomit from exhaustion. The woman stood ready for the next evolution. Martinez checked his watch. Ocean swim, 2 miles. Partner up. The recruits paired off quickly. The woman was left without a partner until Jackson, the least exhausted of his group, grudgingly agreed. "In the water is where she'll finally quit," he muttered to Rodriguez. They entered the cold Pacific water and began swimming parallel to the shore. The conditions were rough, waves pushing them back, currents trying to drag them off course. The woman swam with textbook technique, efficient strokes, proper breathing. She maintained pace with Jackson, who was considered one of the stronger swimmers in the class. After a mile, Jackson was struggling. The accumulated fatigue from the run and the log PT was catching up with him. His strokes became sloppy. The woman maintained her rhythm, occasionally glancing to ensure Jackson was still with her. When Jackson started falling behind, she slowed her pace to match his, not obviously helping him, but ensuring they stayed together as partners. They completed the 2-mile swim. Jackson stumbled onto the beach, collapsing in the sand. The woman walked out of the water calmly, breathing heavy but controlled. As the last pairs finished the swim, the recruits gathered on the beach, utterly spent. That's when 3 figures appeared at the edge of the training area. 3 senior instructors walked onto the beach. Not the regular training cadre, but senior leadership. The kind of instructors who didn't usually attend routine morning PT. Leading them was Master Chief Petty Officer Dawson, the senior enlisted SEAL at the base. He was a legend, with 30 years in the teams and more combat deployments than anyone could count. The recruits immediately sensed something unusual was happening. Martinez, the lead instructor, looked surprised to see them. "Master Chief," he said, snapping to attention. The other 2 instructors with Dawson were also senior men, both with at least 20 years of service. They stopped at the edge of the training area and observed the formation. Their eyes settled on the woman. Dawson's expression changed from neutral to something like recognition and respect. He raised his hand. "Hold the evolution," he called out in a voice that carried absolute authority. Martinez immediately responded, "Class, freeze." 40 exhausted recruits stopped moving. Some were sitting in the sand. Others were standing. All of them were too tired to process what was happening. Dawson walked directly toward the woman. The recruits watched in confused silence as the Master Chief crossed the beach with purposeful strides. He stopped directly in front of her. And then, Master Chief Petty Officer Dawson, one of the most respected and decorated SEALs in the community, snapped to attention and rendered a slow, deliberate salute. "Shadow 6, he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "We weren't informed you would be conducting an evaluation today. My apologies for the informality of the training environment." The beach went silent. The woman returned the salute crisply, then spoke for the first time. Her voice was calm, authoritative, but not loud. "No apology necessary, Master Chief. The informality was precisely what I needed to observe." Dawson nodded. "Would you like to address the candidates?" "Not yet," she said. "But I'll need the training evaluations on all of them by 1600 hours. You'll have them, ma'am." The recruits stood frozen, their exhausted minds trying to process what they were witnessing. Jackson, who had bet she would quit, looked like he might be sick. Peterson, who had complained about dead weight, had gone pale. Rodriguez simply stared, his mouth slightly open. Shadow 6. The name meant nothing to them. But the way Master Chief Dawson treated her, the respect and deference, told them everything they needed to know. This woman wasn't a recruit. She wasn't even a regular SEAL. She was something else entirely. Something far above their understanding. And they had laughed at her, mocked her, tried to make her fail. The realization settled over the formation like a physical weight. Dawson turned to Martinez. "Continue the training schedule. Shadow 6 will observe from here." "Yes, Master Chief." Dawson and the other 2 senior instructors positioned themselves near the woman, forming a small command group separate from the training cadre. Martinez, still processing what had just happened, turned back to the recruits. On your feet. Next evolution starts in 2 minutes. The recruits scrambled to stand, their exhaustion forgotten in the face of this new development. As they formed up, Jackson whispered to Rodriguez, "Who the hell is Shadow 6? Rodriguez shook his head slowly. "I don't know. But we just made the biggest mistake of our lives." The recruits moved through the next evolution in complete silence. The usual banter, the quiet complaints, the camaraderie that came from shared suffering. All of it was gone, replaced by a tension so thick it was almost suffocating. The woman they had mocked, who Master Chief Dawson had called Shadow 6, stood with the senior instructors at the edge of the training area. She watched everything, said nothing, just observed with eyes that missed nothing. Martinez ran them through close-quarters combat drills, boat crew races, and ammunition can exercises. Standard Buddhist torture designed to push bodies and minds past their limits. But the recruits barely noticed the pain. They were too aware of being watched, too conscious of the fact that they had somehow failed a test that they didn't know they were taking. After 2 hours of continuous evolution, Martinez called a break. The recruits collapsed in the sand, gasping for air, muscles trembling from exhaustion. Shadow 6 approached Martinez and spoke quietly. He nodded several times, then called out, "Peterson, Jackson, Rodriguez, Chen, Williams, and Matthews. Front and center. Now." The 6 recruits stumbled to their feet and formed a line in front of Martinez. These were the men who had been most vocal in their mockery, most deliberate in trying to make the woman fail. Shadow 6 walked slowly along the line, studying each one. She stopped in front of Peterson. "What's your name, recruit?" "Peterson, ma'am. Seaman Peterson. Why did you try to leave me behind during the run?" Peterson's face flushed red. I was maintaining pace, ma'am. Standard training protocol." She moved to Jackson. "And you? Why did you accelerate when I joined the formation?" Jackson couldn't meet her eyes. "I was pushing myself, ma'am. Trying to exceed standards." She looked at each of them in turn, then stepped back. "You're all lying. And you're all terrible at it." The silence was absolute. "You deliberately tried to make me fail because you saw a woman and assumed weakness. You made tactical and strategic decisions based on bias rather than observation. In my world, that gets people killed." Master Chief Dawson stepped forward. "Shadow 6 is the operational commander of a unit that doesn't officially exist. A unit that reports directly to the National Security Council and conducts operations that will never be acknowledged. Ever." He paused, letting that sink in. "There are 12 operators in Shadow 6's unit. 12 people selected from the entire United States military and intelligence community. Those 12 operators have capabilities that exceed anything you've been taught or will be taught in conventional special operations." One of the other senior instructors added, "Shadow 6 personally selects every member of her unit. She evaluates hundreds of candidates. Less than 1% are chosen." Shadow 6 spoke again, her voice calm but carrying absolute authority. "I was here today to observe your class. To identify potential candidates for evaluation. Candidates who demonstrate not just physical capability, but the mental flexibility and character necessary for the work we do." She gestured to the 6 men in front of her. "All 6 of you failed the evaluation. Not because you couldn't keep up physically, which you couldn't, but because you made assumptions. You let prejudice guide your decisions. You attempted to sabotage a team member based on appearance rather than performance. Peterson found his voice shaking. Ma'am, we didn't know. No, you didn't know. Which is exactly the point. In the field, you won't know. The enemy won't announce themselves. The asset you need to protect might not look like what you expect. The operator you're supposed to trust might not fit your preconceptions. She looked at each of them. Your inability to see past surface appearance makes you liabilities. You will never be considered for my unit. You will complete Bud-S if you can. You might even become SEALs. But you'll never be Shadow. Dawson spoke up. These 6 recruits are hereby flagged in their training files. They showed poor judgment and bias under evaluation conditions. Dismissed. The 6 men returned to the formation, their faces showing shame, anger, and the slow realization of what they had lost. Shadow 6 walked back to where the rest of the class waited. She scanned the formation slowly, assessing each recruit. She stopped in front of a quiet recruit named Chen, who had said nothing during the entire morning, who had simply run his race, done his work, and treated the unknown woman as he would any other teammate. You, she said. What's your name? Seaman David Chen, ma'am. Why didn't you try to leave me behind? Chen looked confused by the question. Why would I, ma'am? We're training as a team. Leaving someone behind compromises the team, even if that someone might slow you down. Ma'am, with respect, I didn't know if you would slow me down. I didn't know who you were or what your capabilities were. Making assumptions seemed like poor tactical thinking. Shadow 6 almost smiled. Good answer. She moved to another recruit, a smaller man named Williams, who had quietly maintained pace near the woman during the entire run, never trying to show off, never making comments. And you? Why didn't you accelerate when the others did? Williams responded simply. Because burning energy to prove something to someone I didn't know seemed wasteful, ma'am. I ran at the pace that would get me through the full evolution. Seems like basic resource management. Also a good answer. Shadow 6 stepped back and addressed the entire formation. Most of you failed today's evaluation. You let ego, prejudice, or peer pressure guide your decisions. But a few of you demonstrated the kind of thinking I look for. Chen, Williams, Foster, and Ramirez. You 4 showed tactical awareness, team focus, and the ability to assess situations without bias. The 4 named recruits stood slightly straighter, though they looked uncertain about what this meant. Dawson pulled out a tablet and made notes. Shadow 6 continued. Those 4 will receive additional evaluation over the next 6 months. If they continue to demonstrate the qualities I observed today, they may be offered a chance to try out for my unit. The rest of you will continue standard BUDS training. She paused. Let me be clear about something. The unit I command operates at a level most of you can't imagine. We don't exist in any official capacity. We don't receive public recognition. We don't get medals or commendations that appear in files. One of the senior instructors added context. Shadow 6's unit has conducted operations on 6 continents. They've prevented attacks that would have killed thousands. They've extracted assets from impossible situations. They've eliminated threats that conventional forces couldn't touch. And none of it will ever be publicly acknowledged. Shadow 6 looked at the formation. The operators in my unit aren't the biggest or the strongest. They're the smartest, the most adaptable, the ones who can think past their assumptions and biases, the ones who see what others miss. She gestured back toward the 6 recruits she had flagged. Those 6 saw a woman and made assumptions. In my world, the enemy uses those assumptions against you. The terrorist who doesn't look like a terrorist. The threat that hides in plain sight. The asset disguised as something harmless. She let that sink in. I've spent 20 years looking like someone who doesn't belong. Looking harmless. Looking underestimated. That's my greatest tactical advantage. And this morning, most of you proved exactly why it works. Martinez spoke up. Shadow 6's real name is classified. Her operational history is classified. Even the existence of her unit is classified. But she's here because we specifically requested an evaluation of this class. Why? One of the braver recruits asked. Because Bud S produces good SEALs, Dawson answered. But we need to identify the exceptional ones. The ones who have the potential for something beyond conventional special operations. Shadow 6 checked her watch. I've seen what I needed to see. Master Chief, I'll need those evaluations by 1600 as discussed. The 4 candidates I identified should be notified that they're under consideration for advanced selection. Yes, ma'am, Dawson said. Shadow 6 looked at the formation one last time. All of you have one more chance to learn from today. Some of you will understand the lesson. Most won't. The ones who do, who truly internalize what happened here, those are the ones who might eventually become the kind of operators we need. What's the lesson, ma'am? Chen asked. Shadow 6 looked at him directly. That the most dangerous people in the world rarely look dangerous. That capability can't be judged by appearance. That your assumptions and prejudices are vulnerabilities that enemies will exploit. And that if you can't see past those vulnerabilities, you'll never be anything more than average. She turned to leave, then paused and looked back. One more thing. This morning, I observed 40 recruits. 36 of you tried to make me fail because of what you saw. 4 of you treated me as a teammate because that's what the situation required. Those 4 might have what it takes. The other 36 never will. With that, Shadow 6 walked away from the beach, flanked by the 3 senior instructors. The formation watched her go in absolute silence. After she was out of sight, Martinez spoke. That was Shadow 6. Most of you will never see her again. The 4 who were identified, you just received the opportunity of a lifetime. Don't waste it. He looked at Peterson, Jackson, and the others who had been flagged. The rest of you just learned why assumptions are dangerous. I hope it was worth it. As the training day continued, word spread through the SEAL community about what had happened. By evening, every instructor and many of the advanced students had heard the story. The woman who looked ordinary, who joined a drill and was mocked, who turned out to be Shadow 6, the commander of the most classified unit in U.S. Special Operations. The legend was born that day, and 40 recruits learned that the most important evaluation they would ever face wasn't about how fast they could run or how much weight they could lift. It was about whether they could see past their own assumptions. Most of them had failed, but 4 had passed. And those 4 would never forget the lesson Shadow 6 taught them. 6 months later, Seaman David Chen stood in a windowless room in a building that didn't appear on any official base map. He had been instructed to report to coordinates that led him to an unmarked structure on the edge of the Coronado base. No signs, no identification, just a steel door with a card reader. His orders had been simple. Report at 600, bring nothing, tell no one. Chen had completed Bud S 3 months ago. He wore his trident now, a proud SEAL. But the summons that had brought him here wasn't about his SEAL team. It was about something else. The door opened, and a man in civilian clothes gestured him inside. No name, no rank, no conversation. Chen followed him through a series of corridors until they reached a briefing room. Inside, he found 3 other people waiting. Williams, the recruit who had run efficiently without wasting energy. Foster, a quiet Texan who had barely spoken during boot-ass, but consistently performed at the top of every evolution. And Ramirez, a former Army Ranger who had cross-trained to the Navy specifically to attempt boot-ass. The 4 men who Shadow 6 had identified 6 months ago. They nodded to each other, but didn't speak. The atmosphere was tense with anticipation and uncertainty. At 600 exactly, the door opened again. Shadow 6 entered, followed by Master Chief Dawson and 2 other people Chen didn't recognize. One was a woman in her 40s wearing unmarked fatigues. The other was a man with the weathered look of someone who had spent decades in combat zones. Shadow 6 stood at the front of the room. She looked exactly as Chen remembered. Unremarkable. Average height, calm expression. The kind of person you wouldn't notice in a crowd. Until you looked at her eyes. Then you saw the intelligence, the experience, the absolute confidence of someone who had survived situations that would destroy most people. "Good morning," she said. "The 4 of you are here because 6 months ago, you demonstrated something most people never develop. The ability to assess situations without bias, to think tactically rather than emotionally, to value team success over personal ego." She pulled up a presentation on the screen behind her. "Over the past 6 months, you've been under continuous evaluation. Your performance in training, your interactions with teammates, your decision-making under stress, your ability to adapt to unexpected situations." The woman in unmarked fatigues spoke up. "I'm Colonel Reed. I don't officially exist, and neither does the unit I'm part of. Over the past 6 months, my team has been watching all of you. In training, off duty, in situations you didn't know were tests." The weathered man added, "I'm Travis. Just Travis. Former Delta, former CIA, now I work with Shadow 6. I've been monitoring your psych profiles, your behavioral patterns, your stress responses." Shadow 6 continued, "The 4 of you have passed every evaluation. You've shown consistent judgment, tactical awareness, and the mental flexibility required for the work we do. But passing evaluations isn't enough. You need to understand what you're agreeing to before you make a decision." She clicked to the next slide, which showed nothing but classified markings. "The unit I command is called the Strategic Action Group. We don't exist in any official capacity. We don't fall under JSOC, SOCOM, or any conventional military structure. We report directly to the National Security Council through a chain of command that involves 3 people total." Chen felt his heart rate increase. This was beyond anything he had imagined. "Our mission scope is simple," Shadow 6 said. "We conduct operations that are too sensitive, too classified, or too politically volatile for conventional special operations forces. We operate in denied territories. We extract assets that officially don't exist. We eliminate threats that can't be acknowledged." She looked at each of them. "If you join this unit, everything changes. You'll be declared killed in a training accident. Your families will be told you're dead. You'll attend your own funeral. Your old identity ends completely." William spoke up for the first time. "Ma'am, why such extreme cover?" "Because the operations we conduct can never be connected to the United States government," Travis answered. "If we're captured, we can't be acknowledged. If we're killed, there's no body to recover. We simply disappear." Shadow 6 added, "In exchange for this sacrifice, you'll receive training that doesn't exist anywhere else. You'll have access to resources and technology that aren't available to conventional forces. And you'll conduct operations that actually matter on a strategic level." Foster asked quietly, "How long is the commitment?" "Minimum of 5 years," Colonel Reed said. "But realistically, most operators stay for 10 to 15 years. Some, like Shadow 6, make it a career. What's the success rate? Ramirez asked. How many candidates make it through selection? Shadow 6 smiled slightly. Of the four of you, statistically, one might make it through the full selection and training pipeline. Maybe two if this is an exceptional group. And the others? They return to their SEAL teams with no memory of this conversation or this opportunity. We have very effective ways of ensuring operational security. She let that sink in. Selection begins tomorrow and lasts 6 months. It makes Budass look like summer camp. You'll be tested physically, mentally, and emotionally beyond anything you've experienced. We'll break you down completely to see what you're really made of. Chen felt a mixture of fear and excitement. If you make it through selection, you'll undergo 2 years of specialized training. Languages, advanced tactics, intelligence tradecraft, deep cover operations, technical skills that don't exist in conventional military training. What kind of operations would we actually conduct? Williams asked. Shadow 6 pulled up a world map with numerous red dots. Last year, my unit conducted 18 operations across 4 continents. We prevented 2 major terrorist attacks in Europe, extracted 3 intelligence assets from hostile countries, eliminated 7 high-value targets who were beyond the reach of conventional forces, and gathered intelligence that shaped policy decisions at the highest levels of government. She zoomed in on specific locations. None of these operations appear in any official record. None of them will ever be publicly acknowledged. The people we saved will never know we existed. The threats we eliminated will be attributed to accidents or internal conflicts. Travis added, the op tempo is intense. You'll deploy constantly. You'll spend months at a time in hostile territories under deep cover. You'll miss birthdays, holidays, every normal life event. Your families will think you're dead. Your friends will mourn you. And you'll never be able to tell anyone the truth. Sounds wonderful, Foster said dryly, and everyone laughed despite the tension. Shadow 6 smiled. It's not for everyone. Most people can't handle the isolation, the deception, the constant pressure. But for those who can, it's the most meaningful work you'll ever do. She looked at each of them again. I'm giving you 24 hours to decide. If you want to proceed with selection, report back here tomorrow at 0600. If you don't, return to your teams and forget this conversation ever happened. What if we start selection and decide it's not for us? Chen asked. Then you leave, Shadow 6 said simply. No judgment, no consequences. Well, except you'll have wasted everyone's time. But the option exists. Dawson spoke up for the first time. I've known Shadow 6 for 12 years. I've seen the work her unit does. I've seen the impact they have. If you're offered a slot in this unit, it's the highest honor you'll ever receive in your military career, even though no one will ever know about it. Shadow 6 checked her watch. That's all the information you get until you commit to selection. Dismissed. Think carefully. This decision will define the rest of your lives. The 4 recruits were escorted out of the building separately, each driven to different locations to prevent them from discussing what they had heard. Chen spent the next 24 hours in his barracks room, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what had been offered. Die to his family. Give up his identity. Operate in complete shadows, with no recognition, no acknowledgement, no thanks. For what? To conduct operations that would never be known. To save lives that would never know they'd been saved. To serve in a way that would never be celebrated. But the alternative was conventional SEAL operations. Important work, certainly. But Shadow 6 had offered something beyond that. Work that operated at a strategic level, operations that shape the world in ways conventional forces never could. At 0600 the next morning, Chen stood outside the unmarked building. So did Williams, Foster, and Ramirez. All four of them had come back. Shadow 6 was waiting inside. "I knew you'd all return," she said. "You have the profile. The kind of people who are drawn to this work tend to have a certain mindset. You need to matter. You need to know your work has real impact. You're willing to sacrifice recognition for actual results." She led them to a different room. This one containing gear, weapons, and equipment they didn't recognize. "Selection starts now. For the next 6 months, you'll be pushed beyond any limit you thought you had. You'll question why you're here. You'll want to quit. Most candidates do." She looked at them with an expression that might have been sympathy. "But if you make it through, you'll join the most elite operational unit in existence. You'll work alongside people who are the absolute best at what they do. And you'll conduct operations that genuinely make the world safer, even though the world will never know." Travis stepped forward. "Drop your gear. We're starting with a 48-hour navigation exercise through the mountains. No food, minimal water. If you get lost, you fail. If you quit, you fail. If you're more than 2 hours late to the checkpoint, you fail. Questions? No questions. Then move out." Clock started 5 minutes ago. The 4 candidates grabbed their gear and ran for the exit. As they disappeared, Colonel Reed stood beside Shadow 6. "What do you think? 4 starters. How many finishers?" Shadow 6 watched them go. "Chen will make it. He's got the mental toughness. Williams, probably. Foster is 50-50. Ramirez will quit in the first month. He's got the skills but not the psychological resilience for isolation work. So 2, maybe 3 operators out of this group." "That would be a success," Shadow 6 said. "We only need 1 or 2 good operators per year to maintain our numbers." She turned away from the window. "Come on. We've got an operation briefing in 2 hours. Target in Syria. High priority." "What about the candidates?" "They'll figure it out or they won't. Selection is designed to be self-running. Either they have what it takes or they don't." As Shadow 6 walked away to prepare for her next operation, 4 candidates were beginning a 6-month journey that would transform them or break them. Most would break. But the ones who survived would become something beyond special operators. They would become shadows. Invisible, lethal, and absolutely essential. Just like the woman who had walked onto a beach 6 months ago and been laughed at by men who didn't know any better. The legend of Shadow 6 continued to grow. But the woman herself remained exactly what she had always been. Invisible, effective, and completely unconcerned with anyone's opinion. Because the work mattered more than recognition. And that was a lesson her candidates were about to learn in the hardest way possible. 6 months later, David Chen stood in the same unmarked building where his selection had begun. But he barely recognized himself. He had lost 20 pounds of muscle and gained something harder to quantify. A mental edge that came from surviving 6 months of systematic destruction and reconstruction. He wasn't alone. William stood beside him, equally transformed. Lean, weathered, with eyes that had seen things that would never be discussed. Foster had made it too, against Shadow 6's prediction. The quiet Texan had proven tougher than anyone expected. Ramirez had quit in week 7, just as Shadow 6 had predicted. He was back with his SEAL team now, with no memory of what he'd attempted. The psychological conditioning had erased the experience completely. 3 finishers out of 4 starters. Shadow 6 had called it a successful cycle. The door opened, and she entered, followed by Colonel Reed and Travis. Congratulations, Shadow 6 said simply. You've completed selection. You're now the 3 newest members of the Strategic Action Group. She gestured to 3 folders on the table. These are your new identities. Study them, memorize them, become them. As of today, David Chen, Marcus Williams, and James Foster are officially dead. Killed in a training accident off the coast of California 2 weeks ago. Chen opened his folder. Inside was a complete life history for someone named Michael Torres. Birth certificate, school records, employment history, credit report. A fully backstopped identity. Your families attended your funerals, Shadow 6 continued. I attended them myself. Your mothers cried. Your fathers spoke about your service and sacrifice. Your siblings said goodbye. It's done. The 3 men absorbed this information. They had known it was coming, had agreed to it. But the reality was still shocking. William spoke quietly. Did they believe it? Yes, Shadow 6 said. We made it believable. Boat accident during training. Bodies not recovered. Common enough that nobody questioned it. Your teammates mourned you. Your command wrote commendations. You're gone. Foster asked, can we ever contact them, let them know we're alive? No, Colonel Reed said firmly. That's the price of admission. Your old lives are over. You exist only as operators now. Travis added, in 10 or 15 years, when you retire from the unit, we'll stage a return. You'll have been held by a hostile government, presumed dead, finally released. It's been done before. But until then, you're ghosts. Shadow 6 pulled up a presentation. Your training begins tomorrow. 2 years of intensive instruction in languages, advanced tactics, intelligence tradecraft, technical operations, and deep cover protocols. You'll each specialize in different areas based on your aptitudes. She looked at Chen. You've shown exceptional tactical thinking and language acquisition. You'll focus on infiltration operations and target development. She turned to Williams. You have engineering, background, and technical aptitude. You'll specialize in technical operations and cyber capabilities. Finally, Foster, you're a natural chameleon. You'll focus on deep cover identity work and long-term infiltration operations. Over the next 2 years, the 3 men underwent training that existed nowhere else. They learned to speak multiple languages fluently. They studied cultural practices from dozens of countries. They trained in weapons systems from every nation. They learned to build and maintain cover identities that could withstand scrutiny. Shadow 6 personally oversaw much of their training, pushing them beyond what they thought possible. 2 years after beginning their training, Chen found himself in Damascus, Syria, living under deep cover as a Turkish businessman. He had been in country for 6 months, gathering intelligence on a terrorist financing network. Williams was in Moscow, posing as a software engineer, developing access to Russian intelligence systems. Foster was in Karachi, Pakistan, embedded within a criminal organization that had ties to multiple terrorist groups. They operated independently, with minimal contact with their command. They made decisions in real time with no backup and no support. If they were compromised, they would simply disappear. This was the life Shadow 6 had promised them. Isolated, dangerous, meaningful. 3 years into his service, Chen was finally recalled to the unmarked building for an operational briefing. It was the first time he'd seen Shadow 6 in person in over a year. She looked exactly the same. Unremarkable. Calm. The same woman who had joined a training drill and been laughed at by recruits who didn't know any better. Good to see you, Michael, she said, using his cover name out of habit. Good to see you too, ma'am. Your operation in Damascus was exemplary. The intelligence you provided led to the disruption of 3 major attacks and the arrest of 18 key facilitators. Chen nodded. He knew his work had impact, but hearing confirmation was rare and appreciated. I'm pulling you back to work a domestic operation. We've identified a potential threat within the intelligence community. Someone who's been passing classified information to a foreign power. I need you to get close to them, confirm the suspicion, and gather evidence. How long? Could be 6 months, could be 2 years. Depends on how careful they are. And if I find proof, then we deal with it quietly. No public trials, no media exposure, just resolution. This was the reality of Shadow 6's unit. Problems solved in ways that would never be acknowledged or discussed. Over the next year, Chen successfully identified and helped neutralize the compromised intelligence officer. The person simply disappeared from their position, reassigned to a remote location where they could do no harm, never knowing how close they had come to prison or worse. Williams completed a technical operation that provided the U.S. with access to Russian communication systems. The intelligence gathered prevented a major cyber attack on American infrastructure. Foster spent 18 months embedded with a terrorist organization, providing real-time intelligence that enabled the elimination of multiple high-value targets. None of these operations would ever be publicly known. The 3 operators would never receive recognition or commendation. They existed in the shadows, solving problems that conventional forces couldn't touch. 5 years after joining the Strategic Action Group, Chen was summoned back to headquarters for an unusual meeting. Shadow 6 was waiting with a serious expression. "David," she said, using his real name for the first time in years, "I need to tell you something." "What's wrong? Your mother is dying. Cancer. She has maybe 3 months." Chen felt his world shift. He had mourned his own death years ago, had accepted that his family believed he was gone. But hearing that his mother was dying, that she would die believing her son was dead, was almost unbearable. "I want to see her," he said. "You can't," Shadow 6 replied gently. "It would compromise everything. Your cover, your team's security, the operations we're running. I understand the rules. But this is my mother." Shadow 6 looked at him with something that might have been sympathy. "I've been where you are. My father died while I was on a deep cover operation in Chechnya. I couldn't attend his funeral. Couldn't say goodbye. Couldn't let my family know I was alive. It's the hardest part of this work. How did you handle it?" "I remembered why I do this. The lives saved, the threats eliminated, the impact that matters more than personal comfort. Your mother would want you to continue the mission." Chen struggled with the decision for days. Finally, he made peace with it. His mother would die believing he had died years ago. That was the price he had agreed to pay. But Shadow 6 did something unexpected. She arranged for Chen to watch his mother's funeral remotely through a secure video feed. He saw his family mourning, saw his siblings comforting each other, saw his mother's casket lowered into the ground next to the empty grave that bore his name. It was brutal. But it was also closure. After the feed ended, Shadow 6 spoke quietly. "This is why most people can't do what we do. The sacrifice is too great. But you're still here. That means you understand what matters." "I understand," Chen said. "The mission is bigger than any individual." Exactly. 8 years into his service, Chen was offered a choice. He could retire from the unit, be released from captivity, and return to a normal life. Or he could continue operating. He chose to continue. So did Williams and Foster. They had become what Shadow 6 had identified in them years ago. Operators who valued impact over recognition, who understood that the most important work happened in shadows, who were willing to sacrifice everything for results that would never be acknowledged. 10 years after that morning on the beach, when Shadow 6 had joined a training drill, Chen found himself back at Coronado. He was recruiting now, identifying potential candidates for the next selection cycle. He stood at the edge of a training area, watching recruits run through evolutions, observing, assessing, looking for the ones who had the potential to become shadows. He wore unmarked civilian clothes, looked unremarkable, the kind of person recruits would dismiss or ignore, just like Shadow 6 had been dismissed and ignored a decade ago. One of the recruits, a young woman, noticed him watching and called out, "Sir, can I help you? This is a restricted training area." Chen smiled slightly. "Just observing. Carry on." The recruit looked uncertain, but returned to her evolution. Chen made notes on his tablet. This one had shown respect without knowing who he was, had questioned his presence without being dismissive or aggressive, showed promise. He would continue watching, assessing, identifying the few who might have what it took. Because the Strategic Action Group needed a constant flow of exceptional operators, people who could operate in the shadows, sacrifice recognition, and impact the world in ways that would never be known. Somewhere in this training class might be the next Chen, Williams, or Foster, the next generation of shadows who would carry on the work. And somewhere, Shadow 6 herself continued operating, still leading missions, still training operators, still being dismissed and underestimated by people who would never know what she really was. The legend that had started on a beach in Coronado 10 years ago had grown. Every SEAL knew the story now. The woman who joined a drill and was mocked until the instructors revealed she was Shadow 6. It was told to every new Bud-S class as a lesson about assumptions and respect. But the real Shadow 6 remained exactly what she had always been. Invisible, effective, operating in spaces where conventional forces couldn't reach. Training the next generation of operators who would continue the mission long after she was gone. Chen turned away from the training area and headed back to his vehicle. He had candidates to evaluate, operations to plan, missions to conduct. The work never stopped. The shadows never rested. And the operators who moved through those shadows never sought recognition or acknowledgement. They simply did the work that needed to be done, just like the woman who had taught them how. Shadow 6. The commander who looked ordinary, who could walk onto any base, join any formation, and be dismissed as irrelevant, until the moment she revealed who she really was. And by then, the lesson had already been learned. Never judge capability by appearance. Never assume you know who someone is. Never underestimate the quiet person watching from the corner, because that person might be Shadow 6, or one of the operators she trained, and they were always watching, always assessing, always identifying the next generation of shadows who would carry the mission forward. The legend continued, the work continued, and the shadows remained. Invisible, essential, and absolutely lethal, just as they were meant to be.